The transport shuttle to Research Station Omega-7 smelled like recycled air and institutional antiseptic, which Dr. Samuel Hayes figured was probably appropriate for someone about to begin work in what the recruitment materials had euphemistically termed frontier xenobiological research. His new position as senior biological specialist had seemed like the career breakthrough he'd been waiting for: substantial pay increase, cutting-edge research opportunities, and work that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of alien physiology. The recruitment package had been deliberately vague about specifics, mentioning only exotic specimen analysis and advanced physiological studies conducted under military contract in the frontier sector. Samuel had assumed this meant working with tissue samples, voluntary alien subjects, and the kind of ethical oversight that governed all legitimate scientific research. His first hint that assumptions might prove inadequate came when the shuttle pilot refused to make eye contact and mumbled something about "poor bastards" before sealing the cockpit for the final approach. Station Omega-7 hung in the void like a metallic spider, its arms extending into space with the kind of defensive architecture that suggested serious concerns about unwanted visitors. The docking procedures involved more security scans than Samuel had experienced during his military service, and the personnel who greeted him moved with the careful neutrality of people who had learned not to ask uncomfortable questions. Dr. Hayes announced his escort, a thin woman whose lab coat bore stains that Samuel hoped were from legitimate research materials. "I'm Dr. Patricia Vance, Deputy Research Director. Welcome to the frontier of xenobiological science." "Thank you. I'm excited to begin work." "The preliminary materials mentioned exotic specimens." "Indeed. We have several fascinating subjects, but I believe you'll find subject Zeta 9 particularly illuminating." Samuel followed Dr. Vance through corridors that felt more like a maximum security prison than a research facility. Reinforced doors bore warning labels in multiple languages, automated defense systems tracked their movement, and the overall atmosphere suggested that whatever they were studying had been deemed extremely dangerous. "Security seems quite comprehensive," he observed. "Necessary precautions. Some of our subjects possess capabilities that require careful management." They descended through 3 levels of progressively more restrictive security until they reached what Dr. Vance announced as the primary research level. The corridor ahead contained a series of observation windows, each looking into cells that were clearly designed for long-term containment rather than temporary study. "Dr. Hayes, meet subject Zeta 9. Samuel looked through the reinforced transparisteel into a cell that redefined his understanding of institutional cruelty. The space was sterile, austere, and designed with the kind of psychological precision that suggested someone had studied exactly how to break a sentient being's spirit through environmental manipulation alone. In the corner of the cell, curled on what appeared to be the bare minimum of bedding required to maintain basic life functions, was a figure that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. She had been beautiful once. That much was clear despite the ravages of captivity, malnutrition, and what appeared to be years of systematic abuse. Her skin held traces of luminescence that flickered weakly, like dying stars, and her alien ears, gracefully elongated and delicately curved, were fitted with neural dampening devices that pulsed with soft blue light. Quantum-locked chains, far heavier than necessary for restraint, connected her ankles to anchor points in the cell walls. Her clothing consisted of the tattered remains of what might once have been elegant robes, now reduced to barely adequate coverings that preserved minimal dignity while ensuring maximum humiliation. "What is she?" Samuel asked, his voice barely steady. "Former royalty, according to intelligence files. Queen Lyravel of the Etherian Empire, captured during the pacification campaign 6 years ago. Telepathic capabilities, enhanced healing factors, estimated lifespan of several centuries. Quite the research goldmine." Samuel stared at the figure in the cell, at the way she held herself even in defeat, at the intelligence that flickered in her eyes despite obvious efforts to crush it, at the evidence of systematic degradation designed to transform a ruler into a research subject. "She's been here for 6 years. Continuous study. Her physiology has provided insights into alien neural structures, regenerative biology, and psychological resilience factors. The data has been invaluable for understanding conquered populations. Conquered populations. The Etherian Empire posed significant resistance to Terran expansion. Understanding their leadership psychology helps ensure smoother integration of their former territories. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed the implications of Dr. Vance's casual explanation. This is a former head of state. This is a research subject whose unique biology provides opportunities for scientific advancement that would be impossible through conventional means. As they spoke, the figure in the cell stirred slightly, her alien ears twitching in response to voices she could probably hear but not clearly distinguish through the cell's sound dampening. For just a moment, she looked toward the observation window, and Samuel caught a glimpse of eyes that held depths of pain, intelligence, and something that might have been hope, before that hope died as she realized she was simply being observed by another researcher who saw her as a specimen rather than a person. "What exactly will my duties involve?" Samuel asked. "Physiological monitoring, tissue sampling, neural response analysis, and psychological conditioning assessment. Your background in xenobiology makes you uniquely qualified to understand the subtle aspects of her biology that previous researchers may have missed." Samuel nodded slowly, his mind racing through the ethical implications of what he was being asked to participate in. "I'll need to review all previous research data before beginning any new procedures." "Of course. Your predecessor's files are quite comprehensive. Dr. Harrison conducted some fascinating experiments before his transfer. He developed concerns about research protocols that proved incompatible with our mission parameters. I trust you'll demonstrate greater flexibility regarding the necessities of frontier science." As they walked away from the observation window, Samuel glanced back once more at the figure in the cell. Queen Lyravel had returned to her corner, but something in her posture suggested she was aware of being discussed, evaluated, and prepared for whatever new indignities her latest researcher might devise. Samuel spent the rest of the day reviewing files that documented 6 years of systematic experiments designed to break the spirit of someone who had once ruled 12 worlds. By the time he reached his assigned quarters, he understood exactly what kind of frontier science he'd been recruited to conduct, and he knew that his assumptions about ethical oversight and legitimate research had been catastrophically naive. The woman in that cell had been a queen. Now she was being treated like a laboratory animal, and Samuel was expected to continue the process as if it were normal scientific procedure. He stared at his reflection in his quarters mirror and wondered when he'd become someone who could participate in sophisticated torture disguised as research. Samuel's first week reviewing the research files left him questioning everything he thought he understood about scientific ethics and human decency. Dr. Harrison's documentation was thorough, clinical, and absolutely horrifying in its casual description of procedures that would have been considered war crimes if applied to human subjects. Day 1247, subject exhibits continued resistance to psychological conditioning protocols. Recommend increasing neural dampening intensity and reducing nutritional intake to encourage compliance. Day 1381, tissue regeneration studies complete. Subjects' healing capabilities remain functional despite repeated trauma. Notable decrease in luminescence suggests successful suppression of natural energy reserves. Day 1509, telepathic suppression maintaining desired levels. Subject no longer attempts communication with research staff, indicating successful conditioning toward appropriate subject-researcher dynamics. Each entry documented another step in the systematic destruction of someone who had once governed worlds, commanded fleets, and earned the love and loyalty of billions of subjects. The photographs attached to early reports showed Queen Lyravel as she had been upon capture, regal, defiant, her luminous skin blazing with inner light, her alien ears held high despite her chains. Recent photos showed the inevitable result of 6 years of calculated abuse. That same proud figure reduced to something barely recognizable, her light dimmed to almost nothing, her spirit apparently crushed beneath the weight of endless humiliation. Samuel's first direct interaction with her came during what Dr. Vance had termed routine physiological monitoring. He entered the cell expecting to find the broken creature described in recent reports, but discovered something that the clinical documentation had failed to capture. Queen Lyravel watched his approach with eyes that held intelligence, calculation, and a wariness born from experience with researchers who saw her as nothing more than an interesting specimen. Her alien ears twitched slightly as she assessed this new threat, and Samuel realized that the compliance described in the reports was a survival strategy rather than genuine submission. Subject Zeta 9, he said, following established protocols while hating himself for reducing her to a designation number. She didn't respond, but something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps, at his tone, which carried none of the casual cruelty documented in previous researchers' approaches. I need to conduct some basic health assessments, Samuel continued, setting down his equipment with deliberate care. I'll try to make this as comfortable as possible. This time her reaction was unmistakable, confusion. Her head tilted slightly, alien ears focusing on him with the intensity of someone trying to solve an unexpected puzzle. In 6 years of captivity, no researcher had ever expressed concern for her comfort. Samuel's medical training had prepared him to assess alien physiology, but not to confront the evidence of systematic malnutrition disguised as natural decline. Her luminous skin, which should have glowed with internal energy, flickered weakly like dying embers. Her neural patterns, distorted by constant dampening, showed the kind of stress responses usually associated with torture victims. Your nutritional levels are critically low, he said, reviewing his scanner readings. The prescribed diet isn't adequate for your species' metabolic requirements. She stared at him with an expression that seemed to ask why he cared about the dietary needs of a research subject. I'm going to recommend adjusting your feeding schedule and supplement composition, Samuel continued, knowing that he was already stepping beyond the boundaries of his predecessor's approach. Malnutrition corrupts research data. Healthy subjects provide more reliable biological information. It was a careful justification that framed compassion as scientific necessity, but Queen Lyravel's eyes suggested she recognized both the excuse and the genuine concern behind it. Over the following days, Samuel found himself spending far more time in her cell than protocols required, supposedly conducting extended observations but actually learning about the person hidden beneath years of systematic degradation. She remained cautious about engaging with him, but her responses to his presence began to change from wary hostility to curious assessment. You ruled 12 worlds, he said during one of their sessions, abandoning pretense of clinical detachment. The historical records describe the Etherian Empire as one of the most peaceful and prosperous civilizations in known space. Her alien ears flattened against her skull, a gesture he'd learned indicated pain rather than anger. The records also describe how your empire fell, he continued gently. Not through military conquest, but betrayal by trusted advisors who sold intelligence to Terran expansion forces. This time her reaction was immediate and profound. Her luminous skin flared with brief, brilliant light before the neural dampeners activated to suppress the response. In that moment of unguarded emotion, Samuel glimpsed the queen she had been, powerful, magnificent, and utterly betrayed by those she had trusted most. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That shouldn't have happened to you. None of this should have happened to you. Queen Lyravel stared at him with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing through to his soul, evaluating not just his words but his intentions, his character, his worthiness of the trust he was asking her to consider. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse, but it carried harmonics that spoke of vast intelligence and strength that captivity hadn't managed to destroy. Why? She asked. The question held layers of meaning. Why do you care? Why are you different? Why should I believe that this researcher might be unlike all the others who had participated in her systematic destruction? Because you're a person, Samuel replied. Because you deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of what's happened to your empire or your current circumstances. Because what's being done to you is wrong, and someone needs to acknowledge that. Her eyes filled with something Samuel hadn't seen in any of the research photos, tears. Not of despair or defeat, but of surprise that someone had finally seen her as more than a research subject worthy of basic respect. My name, she whispered, is Lyravel. I know, Samuel said. Your Majesty. The title, spoken with genuine respect rather than mockery, broke something loose in her carefully constructed defenses. For the first time in 6 years, Queen Laravel allowed herself to hope that not all humans were monsters, and that someone might finally care about her as a person rather than seeing her as valuable property to be used and discarded. Samuel left her cell that day knowing he'd crossed a line from which there would be no return. He was no longer conducting research, he was befriending someone whose continued captivity he was supposed to facilitate. The question now was what he intended to do about it. 3 weeks into his assignment, Samuel had managed to improve Queen Laravel's living conditions through careful manipulation of research protocols and creative interpretation of scientific necessity. Better nutrition, reduced neural dampening during non-experimental periods, and basic medical care had begun to restore some of her natural luminescence and mental clarity. More importantly, trust was developing between them through conversations that officially counted as extended behavioral observation, but actually resembled friendship growing between two people who had found understanding in an impossible situation. "Tell me about the crystal gardens of Viridian Prime," Samuel said during one of their sessions, having read about the famous botanical preserve that had been the crown jewel of her former empire. Laravel's eyes brightened with memory, her alien ears perking up as she recalled something beautiful from her past. "They sang," she said softly. The crystal formations resonated with the planetary wind patterns and the garden's biorhythms. Music that changed with the seasons, with the time of day, with the emotional states of visitors. "You created that?" "My people created it. I simply facilitated. Ensured they had resources, removed obstacles, provided encouragement." Her expression grew sad. A queen's duty is to enable her people's greatness, not to claim credit for it. Samuel was struck by the contrast between her leadership philosophy and the imperial conquest models that had driven Terran expansion. "No wonder your worlds were prosperous. You governed through cooperation rather than domination. It was the only sustainable approach for a multi-species civilization. Force breeds resentment. Cooperation builds genuine loyalty." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Stone, the military commander whose authorization had originally made Queen Laravel's capture and imprisonment possible. Samuel had been dreading this inspection since learning about it from Dr. Vance, and his fears proved justified the moment the Admiral's cold eyes assessed the scene in the cell. "Dr. Hayes," Admiral Stone said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "I trust you're finding your research subject cooperative. Subject Zeta-9 has been providing valuable data, Admiral. The improved treatment protocols have enhanced research reliability significantly." Improved treatment. The Admiral's attention focused on details that Samuel had hoped might go unnoticed: the better bedding, the adequate nutrition, the reduced chain length that allowed Laravel greater freedom of movement within her cell. "Standard scientific procedure, sir. Healthy subjects provide more reliable biological data than compromised specimens." Admiral Stone studied Queen Laravel with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating valuable property. "This subject represents 6 years of investment in breaking alien leadership psychology. Her compliance is meant to serve as a model for pacifying other conquered populations." The casual admission of the program's true purpose hit Samuel like a physical blow. This wasn't just about studying one alien's biology, it was about developing systematic methods for psychologically destroying the leadership of any species that resisted human expansion. "How many other facilities like this exist?" Samuel asked, already dreading the answer. "Classified. But I will say that Subject Zeta-9's conditioning protocols have already been applied successfully to leadership elements from 4 other conquered civilizations." Samuel felt sick as he processed the implications. Queen Laravel wasn't just one victim, she was the prototype for a galaxy-spanning program of psychological torture designed to break the will of any species that stood in humanity's way. "The research data suggests that stress and trauma actually corrupt the psychological patterns we're trying to study," Samuel said carefully. "Healthier subjects might provide more useful insights into alien leadership psychology." Dr. Hayes, the purpose of this research isn't to understand alien psychology. It's to destroy it. We need broken leaders who can serve as examples to their former subjects. Compliance through despair, not cooperation through respect. Queen Lyravel's luminous skin flared briefly with suppressed emotion as she heard her captors discussing her fate with the casualness of people debating research methodologies. The neural dampeners activated immediately, but not before Samuel caught a glimpse of the rage and determination that 6 years of captivity hadn't managed to eliminate. I expect to see immediate return to previous conditioning protocols, Admiral Stone continued. No more coddling. No more improved amenities. This subject needs to serve as an example of what happens to alien leaders who oppose human authority. After the Admiral left, Samuel sat in his office staring at files that documented similar programs across multiple facilities. Other alien rulers, other systematic destruction of leaders who had governed through wisdom rather than force. The scope of the atrocity was beyond anything he had imagined when accepting this assignment. His personal communicator chimed with a message from someone he'd never heard of. Dr. Hayes, if you're interested in discussing ethical concerns regarding current research methodologies, Dining Hall, Section C, tomorrow 0800 hours. Come alone. Samuel stared at the message, realizing that he might not be the only person at this facility struggling with moral conflicts about their work. The next morning, he found himself face-to-face with Dr. Sarah Kim from the psychology department, whose expression carried the same haunted look he'd been seeing in his own mirror. How many of us know what we're really doing here? She asked without preamble. I'm beginning to think more than the administration realizes, Samuel replied. And I'm also beginning to think that some of us are ready to do something about it. What did you have in mind? Samuel looked around the dining hall, noting other personnel whose conversations seemed to carry the weight of people discussing something far more serious than meal schedules or research protocols. I think, he said carefully, that it might be time to remember that some things are more important than career advancement or following orders. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. The neural dampeners in the lower levels have been experiencing increased technical difficulties recently. Amazing how complex systems can malfunction when critical components develop unexpected stress fractures. And I've noticed that nutritional supplements have been showing up in various subject quarters, apparently due to administrative errors in supply distribution. They looked at each other with the understanding of people who had independently reached the same conclusion, that continuing to participate in systematic atrocity was no longer tolerable, regardless of the personal costs of resistance. Dr. Hayes, I think Subject Zeta-9 is about to experience some very interesting technical difficulties with her restraint systems. Samuel smiled for the first time since arriving at this facility. Dr. Kim, I think you're absolutely right. The revolution was about to begin, and Queen Lyravel was about to discover that not all humans were monsters, and that some were willing to risk everything to prove it. The uprising began not with violence but with a coordinated series of technical malfunctions that swept through Research Station Omega-7's containment systems like a cascade failure designed by people who understood exactly how to make sophisticated technology stop working at precisely the right moments. Samuel had spent 2 weeks coordinating with the growing network of facility personnel who had finally reached their breaking point with the systematic torture they'd been ordered to facilitate. Dr. Kim's psychology team provided intelligence on guard rotations and security protocols, engineering staff prepared to disable critical systems on command, and medical personnel stood ready to treat subjects who had been weakened by years of abuse. Neural dampeners offline in all containment areas, reported Dr. Kim through their improvised communication network. Technical staff estimate 6 hours before backup systems activate. Quantum lock restraints showing stress fractures consistent with metal fatigue, added Chief Engineer Patterson, whose routine maintenance inspections had been systematically weakening containment hardware for weeks. Amazing how these systems degrade when subjected to irregular electromagnetic pulse patterns. Samuel made his way to Queen Lyravel's cell, expecting to find her experiencing the disorientation typical of subjects whose neural dampening had been suddenly removed. Instead, he discovered someone who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The moment the neural dampeners failed, Queen Lyravel's true nature blazed forth like a star emerging from eclipse. Her luminous skin erupted in patterns of brilliant light that pulsed with telepathic energy, her alien ears focused with laser intensity, and her presence filled the cell with power that had been suppressed but never eliminated. "Samuel," she said, his name carrying harmonics that spoke directly to his mind as well as his ears. "I have been waiting." Waiting for what? For someone worthy of trust. For someone who would choose conscience over career. For someone who would prove that not all humans are monsters. Her eyes blazed with determination that 6 years of captivity had failed to crush. "I have been planning." Samuel stared at her, realizing that the broken, compliant prisoner described in research reports had been an act, a carefully maintained deception designed to make her captors underestimate her capabilities while she prepared for opportunity. Planning what? Queen Lyravel's restraints, weakened by weeks of accidental stress fractures, shattered as she applied telepathic force amplified by years of suppressed power. She rose from her corner with fluid grace, no longer the defeated prisoner but once again the queen who had ruled 12 worlds. Planning to free not just myself, but every leader imprisoned in facilities like this one. Planning to expose the systematic atrocity your people have been conducting in the name of expansion. Planning to ensure that what was done to me never happens to anyone else. Her telepathic abilities, unleashed after years of suppression, reached out through the station's infrastructure to contact other imprisoned aliens whose mental voices had been silenced but never eliminated. Samuel watched in amazement as Queen Lyravel coordinated a station-wide uprising through pure thought, organizing resistance among subjects who had been scattered across different containment areas to prevent exactly this kind of coordinated response. "The Andromedan Admiral in Section D is free and securing his area," she reported, her consciousness apparently operating on multiple levels simultaneously. "The Centauri Council leader in Section B has disabled her containment field. The Vegan Collective representative in Section F is coordinating with engineering staff who have joined the uprising." Samuel found himself in the surreal position of witnessing a telepathic command center operating from a prison cell as Queen Lyravel transformed from isolated captive to leader of a multi-species revolution that was spreading beyond the station itself. "How many other facilities like this exist?" he asked. 14 that we know of. But my telepathic range, fully restored, extends across star systems. I am already in contact with imprisoned leaders throughout human space. Her expression grew fierce with righteous determination. "Admiral Stone's atrocity program ends today." The facility's emergency alarms began wailing as the uprising spread beyond containment areas into operational sectors. Samuel watched through security monitors as liberated alien leaders worked alongside human personnel who had finally chosen conscience over complicity, systematically dismantling the infrastructure of systematic torture that had operated in secret for years. "What happens next?" Samuel asked. "Next, we expose everything. Every facility, every prisoner, every order that authorized these programs." Queen Lyravel moved with restored regal bearing toward the cell's exit, her luminous skin blazing with power that made the corridor lighting seem dim by comparison. "Your Galactic Council will discover that their expansion policies have created atrocities that demand immediate response. And after that?" Her smile held depths of wisdom earned through suffering but not broken by it. "After that, we rebuild. Not the old empires based on conquest and domination, but new alliances based on cooperation and mutual respect. We prove that different species can work together as equals rather than as conquerors and conquered." The liberation of Research Station Omega 7 became the catalyst for revelations that shook human space to its foundations. Queen Lyravel's telepathic coordination of similar uprisings across multiple facilities exposed Admiral Stone's program to galactic scrutiny that could no longer be suppressed or classified. Samuel found himself testifying before emergency sessions of the Galactic Council, describing systematic atrocities that had been conducted in humanity's name while most of the population remained ignorant of what their expansion policies had enabled. The research program was designed not to understand alien psychology but to destroy it, he testified. Queen Lyravel and others like her were tortured for years not for scientific knowledge but to serve as broken examples that would discourage resistance to human authority. The political fallout was immediate and comprehensive. Admiral Stone and his associates faced war crimes tribunals, the systematic abuse programs were terminated, and new interspecies agreements established protections that prevented such atrocities from recurring. But for Samuel, the most meaningful changes were personal. Queen Lyravel's restoration to power came not through military force but through the voluntary alliance of liberated species who remembered her just leadership and wanted to rebuild their civilizations on principles of cooperation rather than conquest. Samuel, she said during the ceremony that marked the establishment of the new Etherian Alliance, a coalition of species committed to peaceful cooperation, you proved that individuals can choose conscience over convenience, that moral courage can reshape entire civilizations. You did the real work, he replied. I just chose not to participate in your torture anymore. That choice changed everything. Without humans willing to stand against their own government's atrocities, none of this would have been possible. Samuel accepted her invitation to serve as humanity's first ambassador to the Alliance, helping establish protocols that turned former enemies into genuine allies. His transformation from complicit researcher to active liberator became a symbol of hope that individual moral choices could have galaxy-spanning consequences. The woman who had once been chained as a research subject now stood as a leader reborn, proving that dignity and strength could survive any attempt to destroy them, and that sometimes the most important revolutions began with one person choosing to treat another with the respect they deserved as a fellow sentient being. Queen Lyravel's reign had been interrupted but not ended, and her new alliance would ensure that no leader would ever again be reduced to a research subject for the crime of governing with wisdom rather than force.